France on the Edge, France, Spring 1775. The kingdom stands gilded on the surface. Palaces glitter, nobles dance, philosophers debate in salons. But beneath, millions starve. Bread, the very staple of life, makes up 3/4 of the diet of the ordinary Frenchman. In villages and crowded cities alike, the poor spend half their income on bread alone. When bread rises, the people fall. And when the Controller General of France, Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, lifts the ancient protections on grain prices in the name of laissez-faire, he unleashes not prosperity, but fury. From April to May 1775, nearly 300 riots erupt across France. Bakeries are stormed, markets overturned, granaries plundered. Soldiers march to restore order, but a deeper wound has been opened. This was not the French Revolution itself, but it was its whisper, a first spark flashing in flour dust and blood. This is the story of the Flour War. Chapter 1. The Right to Bread. To understand why bread became France's greatest battlefield, we must return to the peasant's table. In the 18th century, France was an agrarian kingdom. Fields of wheat stretched across its countryside, yet while Europe was discovering new crops, maize, potatoes, French peasants mistrusted them. The potato was considered unfit for humans, sometimes even for animals, except in Alsace and Lorraine, where it had taken root. Instead, the nation clung to grain. Grain meant bread, and bread meant life. Bread wasn't just food, it was a right. Since the Middle Ages, kings of France were called the first bakers of the realm. The monarch was expected to protect his subjects' access to bread, as if bread itself were a divine entitlement. The people believed in what later historians call a moral economy. Food was not a mere commodity, but a shared trust. Merchants who hoarded grain in times of scarcity were sinners. Rioters who seized bread at high prices often left coins behind. A taxation populaire, a fair price imposed by the people themselves. This was not theft. This was justice. Bread riots were not new to France, but in 1775, they would explode like never before. Chapter 2. Turgot and the Heir of Freedom. In May 1774, Louis XVI ascended the throne. Barely 20, awkward, eager to be loved, he inherited a kingdom already in debt and discontent. One of his first decisions was bold. He appointed Turgot as Controller General. Turgot was a man of the Enlightenment, a believer in the physiocrats, those economic philosophers who declared, "Wealth flows from agriculture. Nature's laws must guide society. Government meddling strangles prosperity." Turgot dreamed of freeing grain from centuries of royal regulation. He imagined farmers growing more, merchants selling freely, and the market naturally balancing supply and demand. As he proclaimed, he wanted the economy to breathe the pure and heady air of market exchange. On 13th September 1774, he abolished grain regulations and proclaimed free trade. But nature had other plans. The harvest of 1774 was poor. Merchants, no longer bound by regulation, bought up grain in healthy regions and resold it in famine-struck areas at sky-high prices. Hunger, once local, became nationwide. And so, as winter turned to spring, anger boiled. Chapter 3. The First Sparks. The first tremor came in Reims, March 1775. A crowd gathered outside a monastery, demanding cheaper bread. The monks handed out loaves, and the crowd dispersed peacefully. But by April, the pressure had grown unbearable. On 22nd April in Beaumont-sur-Oise, grain sold at 26 livres per setier, already crushing. By 27th April, it soared to 32 livres. The villagers, betrayed, erupted. They stormed the market, drove out merchants, and seized grain. But true to the moral economy, they left behind 12 livres per setier, the price they believed just. Word spread. The very next day, in Meru, villagers, mostly women, slashed open sacks with knives, scooping grain into their aprons. In Pontoise, over 100 people stopped grain carts and sacked merchants' homes. Within days, the fire spread across the Paris basin. Cynthia Bouton, historian of the riots, wrote, "Once lit, the conflagration spread rapidly and in many directions at once. And indeed, it raced like wildfire." Chapter 4. From Village to Kingdom. By early May, riots struck Vernon in Normandy. Thousands besieged a grain magazine, hammering at locked doors with knives, scissors, even sledgehammers. Police fired into the crowd, wounding 6, but the mob only grew angrier. They attacked mills, smashed windows, rained stones on soldiers. On 3rd May, riots peaked. That day alone, 14 markets and 42 villages erupted. Women, children, peasants, craftsmen, all joined. By 6th May, brigands were spilling into the countryside, sometimes looting farms. Yet most rioters still targeted profiteers, the wealthy millers and merchants. Even in fury, they clung to taxation populaire. In Versailles itself, 5,000 rioters stormed the royal flour stores, seizing half of 900 sacks before soldiers arrived. To pacify them, the Prince de Poix promised flour at 2 sous a pound. The mob calmed, but the myth later spread that Louis XVI himself had bravely opened the gates, addressed the people with fatherly love, and was cheered with cries of "Vive le Roi." The truth was less heroic. The royal family had quietly fled. Chapter 5. The Crown Strikes Back. By 3rd May, Paris itself was in flames. Hundreds of bakeries were raided. Jean-Charles Pierre Lenoir, Lieutenant General of Police, had failed to act. Now, the Crown responded with force. 25,000 soldiers were deployed. Markets were patrolled. Bakeries guarded. Police, under this shield, began mass arrests. On 5th May, Louis XVI ordered severe repression. 4 days later, he offered amnesty to those who returned stolen goods, except ringleaders. By mid-May, the riots had burned out. By 11th June 1775, the king's coronation day, calm had returned. But scars remained. Chapter 6. Punishment and Conspiracy. The crackdown was brutal by the standards of the age. 548 arrests were made. 2 leaders were hanged. 15 condemned to galley slavery, 5 for life, 9 locked away in royal prisons. Turgot, shaken, convinced himself the flour war was no genuine hunger, but a conspiracy to discredit him. Pamphlets mocked his policies, spreading like wildfire through salons and streets. The people, meanwhile, whispered of a darker plot, the Pacte de Famine. They believed king, nobles, and merchants conspired to hoard grain, starving the poor to keep them weak. Louis XVI tried to show solidarity by eating maslin bread, the coarse rye and wheat loaf of peasants, instead of the white bread of nobles. It was too little. Trust was broken. Within a year, Turgot was dismissed, but the wound remained open. Chapter 7. The Long Shadow of the Flour War. The Flour War was not the bloodiest riot of the century. It was not the last. But it was different. It was nationwide. It showed that hunger was no longer a local misfortune, but a political crisis. It revealed that the people of France could act together, in hundreds of towns, against the state. And above all, it exposed the fragility of the monarchy. Louis XVI had barely begun his reign, and already his subjects doubted him. The years ahead would bring more bread riots. In the south, 1778. In Normandy, 1784 and 1785. In Paris itself, October 1789, when women marched to Versailles crying, "Bread, bread," and dragged the king back to the capital. The Flower War was the first drizzle before the storm that would topple a monarchy, burn a nation, and shake the world. Bread and Revolution. The Flower War is remembered less than the storming of the Bastille or the guillotine in Paris. Yet it was here, in the riot-torn markets of 1775, that France first revealed the truth. Bread was life. Bread was power. Bread was revolution. In the clamor of women slashing grain sacks, in the cries of peasants demanding justice, in the soldiers' muskets firing over Norman crowds, the revolution's first heartbeat pulsed. The people of France had risen not for liberty, not for equality, not yet for fraternity, but for bread. And in their hunger, the old world began to crumble.